February 24th, 2025, Chicago, Illinois. Marcus Hale had not slept more than 3 hours in 2 days, and it showed in every line. Carved across his 34-year-old face, in the dark circles sitting heavy beneath his eyes, in the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the elevator door open for his 3 6-year-old daughters, Lily, Layla, and Luna, who were already arguing about whose backpack was whose, even though all 3 backpacks were identical, and he had bought them that way on purpose, because he thought it would simplify mornings, and he had been completely, catastrophically wrong about that. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small moments to change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories. Also, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from. He was a single father, had been for 3 years, ever since his wife passed away from a sudden illness that had rearranged the entire architecture of his life overnight, and every single morning felt like running a marathon before the sun had even properly risen over the Chicago skyline. The building they lived in was a tall, residential high-rise called the Ashford Towers, 32 floors of glass and steel sitting at the corner of Michigan Avenue. And Marcus had an important job interview on the 14th floor of an office building 4 blocks away, the first real interview he had been able to land in 8 months. And he needed to drop the girls at the 7th floor daycare center inside their own building before he left. He pressed the button for 7, he thought. He was also simultaneously stopping Luna from pulling Lily's ponytail and answering a text message from his mother, who was asking if he needed her to pick the girls up later, and his brain was running about 17 parallel tasks when the elevator doors slid shut and began to rise. What he did not notice, not immediately, was that Layla had pressed a different button entirely, had pressed it with the enthusiastic and entirely consequence-free confidence that only a 6-year-old can possess. And that button was the button for the 22nd floor, which was not the daycare, which was not anywhere near the daycare, which was in fact the executive floor of the company called Verano Capital Group, one of the most powerful private investment firms in the Midwest. The elevator opened on 22, and before Marcus could process what had happened, all 3 girls had poured out into the sleek marble lobby, like water escaping a broken dam, drawn immediately by a large decorative fountain in the center of the reception area that had smooth stones in it and soft blue lighting underneath, and which was, in the eyes of 3 6-year-olds, the single most magical thing they had ever seen in their entire lives. Marcus rushed after them, saying their names in that specific strained whisper voice that parents develop when they are trying to project authority without making a scene. And it was precisely at that moment, in the middle of his desperate attempt to gather his daughters like scattered leaves in wind, that he collided directly with a woman who was walking fast and looking down at a tablet and carrying a coffee cup that immediately went sideways and covered the front of her white blazer and dark espresso. The woman was Diane Verano, 40 years old, founder and CEO of Verano Capital Group, the woman whose name was literally on the wall behind reception in polished bronze letters. And she was already having a terrible morning because her board meeting had been moved up by an hour, and 2 of her senior analysts had called in sick and her assistant had quit 2 days ago, and she had not yet found a replacement. She looked up from her ruined blazer, and she said, with a sharpness that filled the entire lobby, "Can you please control your children and watch where you are going?" And Marcus began apologizing immediately, genuinely and thoroughly, calling the girls to him, grabbing napkins from a nearby hospitality cart, trying to dab at her jacket while she pulled away from him. And then Luna, precious, unstoppable Luna, looked up at Diane with wide brown eyes and said very clearly and very sincerely, "Lady, you look like you need a hug." And something shifted almost imperceptibly in Diane's expression before she locked it back down and said to Marcus, directly and without softening it at all, "Please, just take them and go." And Marcus, exhausted and embarrassed, and already knowing he was going to be late for his interview, said quietly, "I'm sorry, I really am. Today has just been—" And she cut him off and said, "Shut up. Please, I have a board meeting," and turned and walked away. Marcus gathered his girls, got back in the elevator, got them to the correct floor, dropped them at daycare, and walked to his interview, already carrying the weight of that humiliation on top of everything else. He did not get the job. He came home that evening and sat at the kitchen table, while his daughters slept, and he just held his face in his hands for a long time. What Marcus did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that 8 months ago, he had done something that had changed Diane, Verano's life, without ever realizing it. 8 months ago, he had been walking through the parking garage of this same building late at night, heading to his car after picking up cold medicine for Luna, when he saw a woman sitting on the ground beside a concrete pillar, shaking badly, clearly in medical distress, and he had not walked past, had not assumed someone else would handle it, had immediately crouched beside her, called emergency services, stayed with her, talking to her calmly, holding her hand until the paramedics arrived, and then given his name to the building security and left, because his daughter needed her medicine. That woman had been Diane. She had been having a severe panic attack that had escalated into a cardiac episode, and the doctors later told her that the fast response had genuinely mattered. She had asked security for the name of the man who called for help, and security had told her a resident named Marcus Hale, single father, 3rd floor. She had meant to find him. She had written it on a note and put it on her desk, and then the weeks had swallowed the intention the way weeks do, and she had never followed through. It was her assistant, the one who had just quit, who connected the pieces the morning after the elevator incident, having overheard the name Marcus Hale, when security filed a minor incident report about the coffee spill, and who sent Diane a message before leaving for good that simply said, "The man from the garage." Diane sat at her desk that night with the realization settling over her slowly, and then all at once. She found Marcus's contact through building management the next morning, and she called him, and when he answered, she did not start with pleasantries, and she did not ease into it. She said, "This is Diane Verano. I was unforgivably rude to you yesterday, and I owe you an apology that is years overdue, and I would like to offer you a position as my executive coordinator if you are still looking for work, not out of guilt, but because anyone who stays calm in a crisis, the way you did, is exactly who I need beside me." And there was a long silence on the line, and then Marcus said, very quietly, "My daughter Luna said you looked like you needed a hug," and Diane, for the first time in a very long time, laughed until her eyes were wet. Sometimes the person you push away is the one who already saved everything that matters, and sometimes life has a way of looping back around to close the circles we left open. If this story made you feel something real, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories, where every story is a reminder that small acts of grace travel farther than we ever know.